Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Richard Sachs, Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs at the University of Rio Grande and Rio Grande Community College in beautiful southeastern Ohio. And my guest this afternoon is Dr. Traci Connor. Dr. Connor is an instructor of English and she's teaching for us at the Meigs campus. And we're delighted to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you. This is fun.
Good.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to talk a lot about composition and rhetoric and poetry and things like that, but tell us a little bit about your background. I know your bachelor's degree is from Brigham Young, and I've heard that you played varsity basketball there.
That's true.
Okay.
Yes. So my degree was a circuitous degree at Brigham Young.
Yeah.
It took me a few years to eventually get my degree. I actually started at Brigham Young and then moved to Los Angeles and went to Cal State LA, where I also played basketball, and then ultimately returned to BYU and finished up my degree. Took me about 9 years all told, I think.
Oh my word, okay.
Might have been because I had 6 different majors along the way. But,
wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, I finally got it.
So I'm feeling like strong forward or small forward, power forward? No?
I wish.
Yeah.
I really think I should have played a 4.
Yeah.
You know, which is
Sure.
a power forward,
Right.
but I'm not actually tall enough. And if you saw me on campus, you might disagree with me. But
Okay.
I played a center, and
Oh, did you really?
I'm
Wow.
only 6'1", but
Okay.
played center. So most of the people I was playing against were 6'4" and 6'5".
Yeah, oh gosh,
Yeah.
I feel your pain because I played D3 basketball back in the 70s, and at 6'4", I was a forward. We would just play 2 forwards and 3 guards. And frequently I was like 6'4", 190, then I'd be up against guys 6'7", 240, and I'd lean against them. It would be like leaning against a tree. There was no way I was going to box them out. And over time, you know, I know, well, I'm old enough. I was playing in the 70s. We had no three-point line. So you were playing in late 80s, early 90s, essentially. And one thing I really kind of disliked, even though between the age of 25 and 40, playing in recreational leagues, I was suddenly a commodity because I had sat bench on a Division III team.
Right.
But as a 6'4" guy who could hit a free throw, I was such a commodity.
Yeah. Never had to wait for a game.
But what really annoyed me was, well, and even in leagues when you know, like we'd have the playoffs and I'd tear cartilage and get scoped and come back 4 weeks later for the playoffs, which seems ridiculous now that I was doing that. But what I hated about that is they would make me the center. So now I have to play with my back to the basket. Well, I was used to being a forward in the corner, even before a three-point line, and the guards would penetrate and then shoot out, and I'd have that corner jumper, or if I didn't get the ball, I'm crashing for a rebound. Well, you know the difference. If you're crashing from the side for a rebound, you can go in and grab the ball, but if you're inside already, other people like me are jumping over you.
You're
Did you
just
feel
wrestling.
the same way?
You're
Yeah.
wrestling beneath
Yeah.
the basket, yeah.
No, I'd rather not play center. That was no fun.
It was fun.
Oh, okay. Oh, was it
Okay,
fun? Okay,
yes.
good. Well, that's good. And then you got an MFA at University of Utah in creative writing.
I did.
I'm not sure our audience understands the difference between an MA and an MFA and an MS. I'll just say that MA degrees are common in English. You get a Master of Arts degree in English as opposed to like a Master of Science in biology or something. Tell us about the MFA degree.
Well, an MFA is usually, not always the case, but in my case, a little bit longer than an MA degree. It is considered a terminal degree in my field, though I would say that's probably changing a little bit, really. It is still a terminal degree, but most people who get an MFA are going on to get their PhDs. It includes a lot of some of the same kinds of work, a lot of literature, a lot of theory in my case. Came from a highly theoretical university where we did a lot of work. One of my advisors for my dissertation happens to be Derrida's student. So,
oh, really? Okay. So again, we're going to use Derridian as an adjective.
Yes.
Which is something I learned in Ann Arbor in graduate school in the 1980s, and I have not used it that way since, except once with Dr. Jackson Connor, your husband, when I said, oh, that's very Derridian of you to say that. And of course, we're referring to Jacques Derrida, who was one French, can I call him a structuralist?
Sure.
Yeah, a French structuralist or
post-structuralist,
literary critic. And Jacques Derrida, Jacques Lacan, Foucault, Michel Foucault, the French literary critics. In the 80s, when I was finishing my doctorate, they were premier, really, in the world.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, one of my advisors was French.
Okay.
And actually had grown up in France, and so had quite an affinity for the French theorists. And then another was Derrida's student, so I know a lot about Derrida beyond the books.
Oh, really? Okay.
Like, for example, that he loved to wear leather jackets and spent a lot of time at parties.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
And again, for those of you in the audience who want to add something to your reading list, the standard text in Ann Arbor that we read was Of Grammatology. And I'm sure you know Derrida much better than I do, so please add to that.
I think if our audience is looking for books to add to their reading list.
Oh, that's probably not it. Yeah.
maybe let's
Just
start
a good
with
Jane
something.
Austen novel.
Yeah, let's start with something else.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. And then your PhD, also from University of Utah,
Yes.
is also in creative writing, literature and creative writing. So, what is your premier genre? Do you write in poetry or prose or
Yes.
drama? Or
Yes.
all the
Yes.
above. Okay.
Yeah, I have a lot of publications in poetry. I have a lot of publications in nonfiction. I have a lot of publications in fiction. I did happen to watch Dr. Traci Connor's interview just the other day, and I'll repeat something he said, but the fact is, writing is writing.
Yeah. Oh,
And
good point. Good point.
in terms of art and in terms of creative writing, it really is a different form, but an expression of the same
sure.
sort of creativity, the same sort of genesis.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you've just anticipated what would have been my next question, and that is, in my career of over 3.5 decades, it is very common to find your composition rhetoric specialists have a strong creative writing background,
Yeah.
even though I think a lot of students need to understand that the classic freshman English class is not creative writing, but it's composition and rhetoric, where you're
Sure.
learning, description, narration, argumentation, research
Sure.
writing, things like that.
So I would say writing is writing, certainly. When we're talking about art and creative writing, it has some of the same sorts of expressions in other kinds of writing, argumentative writing, the kinds of writing we do in the writing classroom. But I would say that there's actually a lot of difference as well. I would say that in the writing classroom, that there's a much stronger focus on audience and who you're talking to. I think as an artist, that should be your last consideration. As you're creating art, as you're writing creatively, you're not thinking about the audience. If you do, the writing's sunk, right? Because now you've become very conscious to what you're doing, and the very notion of creativity is creating something that did not exist. So that there has to be a discovery. If you already know what you're doing as an artist, it's too late to create. Whereas in the writing classroom, with that focus on knowing who you're talking to and what your purpose is and what you're trying to do, while some of those skills I think are going to transfer, I do really think they're quite different in terms of how you teach, how you learn, how you approach that kind of writing. I really do. Yeah. So for me, I certainly think that there is something about a creative writer who obviously gravitates towards writing and loves writing and probably has a natural affinity for those kinds of skills, and thus is able to transfer what they love and know how to do over to that other kind of writing. But I know for me, I really did need a lot of training. I really did need a good mentor and a good program, and I really did have to start thinking very intentionally about the different ways to approach argument and to approach more academic kinds of writing as a teacher in particular.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, what came naturally for me as a writer, right? I could go into a writing classroom as a student, and it came naturally for me. And I could write a good paper without really understanding or paying attention to how I was doing that. I guess like we're talking basketball, like Michael Jordan, right? He's got all these skills, doesn't really know, and I'm not saying I'm a writer on par with with Michael Jordan as a basketball player, but it's a natural talent, and it comes naturally to us. And I think to be a good teacher, which I hope to be, which I continually strive to be, it really is becoming much more conscious about what you're doing, why you're doing it, how you do it, so that you can transfer.
Yeah. Well, I think back of my own experience. I had a bachelor's at 21, a master's at 22, and then I stopped out of the doctoral program because I wanted to write a novel. And I get a prep school teaching job, and I do that for 3 years while my first wife was in law school. And I found that I had almost no time to write, but the same kind of thing. I was always a good writer, but now at 22, I had to start teaching people how to write. And what I ended up doing, I found a book, Classical Rhetoric for the Modern Student. And because of my background, that just made sense to me. And I taught critical thinking, and I taught syllogisms and whatever. And I still enjoyed teaching literature much more, but there was a great sense of gratification when you saw the progress that a student makes over the course of the term, and from being a very basic writer to asking the right questions and grappling with writing and developing some confidence.
Yeah, I would say that you speak about enjoying teaching literature. I would say I am a writing teacher through and through.
Oh, that's great.
I love that, the process, and I think that that's probably the most important part about teaching writing and about learning writing, is to learn the process. To learn that you're going to see some bad writing before you see some good writing, but it's just the process of getting that draft on the page and seeing what's working and what's not. You know, even when I teach literature, I find myself focusing so intently on how are these words working? What is the effect of that choice? How does that relate to, you know, the other things on the page? And
that reminds me of a quotation. I used to think it was my father's quotation, but I found out it was actually Leo Tolstoy, and he would quote it without attributing it to Tolstoy. And the quote is, "There's no good writing, there's only good rewriting." And I can see that, because I know when my students have had writer's block, I say, get the junk out of your head and down on the page, and then you can start crossing things out and moving it around. But it's really hard. It reminds me of a philosophy class I had in college, where the professor would put nothing on the board. He would just look up in the air and say, now, Thales believes this, and Anaximander believes that. And literally all of us were looking up in the air where there was nothing, but that's where he was pointing to, and he wouldn't put things on the board. So it was interesting when I started teaching, and then at a young age, I hired on at an institution where there were a lot of deaf students. So suddenly I have deaf students in the class, and people are transliterating for them. And I learned to put more things on the board. And so again, every time something different happens in your career, I think we kind of adjust to it. Adjust that pedagogy a little bit.
Yeah, and hopefully get better, right?
Right.
Hopefully do it better. Yeah.
So I went to the oldest Quaker college in the country, Haverford College, and I know you taught at Guilford College, which I believe is the second oldest college, Quaker college in the country, founded in 1837. But we're going to take a break right now, and Dr. Connor is going to answer that question right after this break. So I hope that preps you for whatever. In the second half, is there anything I'm going to talk about? So again, we were talking a little bit about your experience at Guilford College, which I think was 3 years or so in North Carolina.
It was a pretty extraordinary experience. It's a really great college. It's an interesting. You know, so you've gone to a Quaker college before, and I do think there's a slightly different approach, maybe, let's call it
Ethos,
approach. To education and to classroom experiences, very interdisciplinary, very, let's call it creative in the way we teach. So for example, there was another professor there who was a professor of international relations. He was teaching a class on international relations and set up out in the green there on campus an enormous situation where he brought in big, giant, blown up balls and different kinds of structures, and they had an enormous water fight out on the green to talk about international relations and how you build, I suppose, not my class, but that's the kind of thing you would see, right? It's like, oh, this is a class. It's a giant water balloon fight. So I had a really nice opportunity to do some really interesting things in terms of my classes. So for example, I taught a class on monsters, which is my that's kind of my area of study. So my PhD exams were in monstrosity and monsters.
Wow.
And I was able to teach this class where we not only watched monster horror films, we also read short stories from many contemporary writers and created films. So we actually had a Scene and Scream film festival at the end of the class.
Oh, wow.
And we showed the whole thing in the big auditorium and had people come to view student films, and so was fun.
So as a mother, and I don't want to get too specific on this, but as a father of 5 kids, I have some very specific beliefs about horror films. Now my kids, the youngest is 11, the oldest is 30 now, but my daughter, especially, who's in her late 20s now, as a little kid, she would always want to see horror films or have me read a scary story, and then at 2, 3, 4, 5 in the morning, she'd wake up crying with nightmares, and I'd have to hold her. And so I got to the point where I'd say, I'm not reading it. Oh no, I want to do it, I want to do it. So it was almost, I don't know if she was like scaring herself on purpose, it seemed like, almost like to kind of tempt the darkness or the abyss.
Isn't it true that we do have this fascination? As
Yeah.
human beings, there's this fascination with the unknown, with what we might call the uncharted territory, right? Which is something that we talk about in monster theory, which is an actual theory, it's monster theory. But this idea of beyond the bonds of what we see as culturally normal, right? What's acceptable in our culture, the kinds of values and beliefs and things. Beyond that normalcy, we can't see anything. It's mapless, it's chartless, and yet we are fascinated with that as human beings, and we're drawn to that. And that's where our monsters live, in that place where we can't see them.
Sure.
We don't know exactly what's out there and why it's out there or what it's representing. And there's something, I think, about human nature and the human soul that is interested in knowing or seeing or figuring out what we don't know, or you know, what happens when we go beyond.
Yeah. But, you know, and again, I'm not familiar with that area at all, but it occurs to me now, years ago, I saw a presentation on Japanese horror films at a pop culture conference, and they talked about Gamera, or whoever that big Japanese monster was in the 40s, who had supposedly been created because of the atom bomb. It was like whatever that was. And it was a beautiful conference presentation about how this was an explanation for the Japanese character, you know, trying to cope with, I guess post 9/11 will have similar things, something horrible, horrific happens, and then culture has to try to make sense of it, even though you can't make sense of something.
You're distilling monster theory.
Am I? Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
This is what monster theory suggests, is that if we read our monsters, we can actually read what is beyond normal for our particular culture at the time. We can read where we're afraid culturally as a large group without even being aware of it. Hindsight is 20/20. We can look back now and see that Godzilla and and all of these other monsters, we can see what they represented now because they coincided with the nuclear threat. And if you look at it, here's Godzilla who shows up to a Japanese town born of radiation and levels a whole town, right? Just by Well, we know what happened historically. You know, in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. We saw what happened. And so here is a monster that embodies that fear that is too much to deal with for humans.
You know, as you've been talking, I've been thinking about all those Twilight Zone episodes, and I didn't like it as a kid. And now that it's on Netflix, my adult sons are like, "Oh, you got to watch it." So I watched it again. I still don't like it. I still think I'm going to have nightmares.
What about the one with the little monster character out on the wing of the plane?
Oh yes, with the young William Shatner. That's one of the scariest things in the world, isn't it? And Rod Serling, graduate of Antioch College here in Ohio.
I didn't know that. What do you know?
Yeah, he was in the same class with Coretta Scott King. Can you imagine that? Yeah,
wow.
Yeah. Antioch had some extraordinary people go through it, but I mean, I think Twilight Zone is the same thing. That it's not even what they showed you; it's the fear, and you go back and see the production techniques which were great for 1959 or 61, but right now you see how fake it is. But you know, I was so scared. I'm still scared. I don't want to see that William Shatner
that's the funny thing.
episode.
So I study monstrosity. I'm very interested, and really I started with this this study not because I was interested in monsters per se, but because I was interested in humanity. I was interested in human monsters. Why do we think of some humans as less than normal or as monsters? Why do we do that? What does that represent? So I really did start with humanity and with people, and that led me to this idea of monsters and what we make of people because of our own sorts of fears or because of our own senses of cultural normativity. So.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm still afraid too.
Okay, are you okay?
Yeah. Taught a
Okay,
whole class on horror films, and it's
Yeah.
terrifying just about every day.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. So your position is at the Meigs campus. Can you
is,
talk a
yeah.
little bit about the Meigs campus? It's a beautiful
Sure.
building. It's not real big.
Sure.
It's almost covered by the car lot now. You can't see it quite as well, but it's still there. I don't know if that brings in more or fewer people that there all those cars there. But tell us about Meigs and tell us about your teaching there.
Sure. So I do work at Meigs. I love it at Meigs. I love the students I work with. It's just been an extraordinary experience for me, a real opportunity for growth, but also just, you know, I would just love to express to everyone just how honored I am to work with these students. I find these students to be incredibly motivating, incredibly hardworking, goal-oriented students who are really going after these degrees and this learning and the things that they want for their lives, despite, for example, you know, working 12-hour shifts or working all night or having children at home. Just really, I honestly, it's been about the best semester of my teaching career to work with these students.
I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah.
I teach writing at Meigs, both Composition 1 and Composition 2. I'll be teaching creative writing next semester.
Oh, great.
Which, if any of my students are watching, I think it's going to be a great class. So,
so I had to teach creative writing twice in '83 and
you
80.
had to teach creative
I
writing?
had to.
Oh, it's a
I did my
wonderful
doctorate.
class.
Oh no, I loved it. I loved it, but I was not prepared to teach it because I was in the PhD program, and they generally gave that to MFA programs. But '82 to '86, I did my doctorate, and I won a teaching award in '84. So they gave me extra summer teaching. And one summer they said, the only thing we have is a creative writing course. And I thought, yeah, I can do that. And I still remember Stephen Minot's 3 genres really helped me. I don't know if that text is still used, but, and it actually helped me, I think, in my later, in all the dozens of composition sections I taught, because you asked the question of genre. Should this be poetry, prose, or drama? And also, which subsets? For example, if you buy a toaster oven and it breaks, should you write a sonnet to the manufacturer describing your dismay? Probably not. You should write a complaint letter, right? And so I would say there's this form of a complaint letter that you could write a sonnet, and it might be beautiful and could still convey the same thing, but they wouldn't know what they were getting. So,
well, okay.
Yeah, okay.
But you're approaching this like a literature professor, right?
Yes, very limited. Yeah.
No, it's not limiting.
Yeah,
it's just it's a different perspective. And I would say that for me, teaching creative writing is really about teaching creativity.
Okay.
So creative writing is about creativity, and I'm going to do this thing that makes no sense. So all of the people who are biologists and others out there, forgive me for this. But I talk about creative writing from happening here in the head. I know that's not true physiologically, but it's because I can't see it. This is the part of the head I can't see. So I said, when you're learning how to write creatively, you're learning to write. You're learning to trust that place in your mind where you are not in control, where you can't see, where things. It's like dreaming on the page, right? Where there are ideas and thoughts and connections in there that are happening despite you, and despite your logical mind, which I know, again, not physiologically true, but the part I can see. It's back here. And so for me, the teaching of creative writing is learning to trust and access this, letting go of that control. The craft of writing is deciding what to do on revision, right? But the creativity, you're not thinking about genre. You're not thinking about the audience yet.
Right.
You're just seeing what happens.
Yeah, and you've made a good point as well, that great art sometimes, the artist creates things and they're not even aware of some of the synchronies within that art, because they've taken their creativity and put it to play, and then suddenly there's all these other intricate, like, lattice work that's created.
Yeah, and if you trust it, those things will happen.
Right.
Because it's all in there.
Yeah.
If you try to make that happen, it becomes very false and very forced because it's no longer creative.
Yeah.
It's just a rehash of something else.
Well, I remember reading Hemingway's biography, and he said Carlos Baker's biography of Hemingway, and he said that Hemingway wrote only 750 words a day, and that's only about 3 pages. And he wrote standing up on a lectern in a nightshirt, and he wrote every morning, and he wouldn't have anything to eat. He'd have like coffee or whatever, and he would just write. And especially when he got hooked up with a good idea, he'd stop, because that way the next day he could write that out.
So I tried that once.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know. I don't think there's any magic trick. There's for me, it's just
you got to make it your own.
Just sitting down, getting it done, right?
Yeah.
Just sit down and let go. Really, it's more about writing creatively. Is really more. The challenge is really about letting go, rather than trying to be in control of what you're writing. As soon as you try to grab control of your writing, you're done. Stop. Okay. It's not about the writer's block, which so many people say. It's about losing control to be a creative writer, at least in generation, in the beginning.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Connor, I'm getting the signal that we're out of time. This has been wonderful. Yeah, I know. So much fun. Dr. Traci Connor, she teaches at the Meigs campus in Pomeroy, Ohio. And she teaches there every term, so you should come take one of her classes. Thank you very much for your time and for your insights.
This has been great.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it too. Thank you.